call the executive by board to order for Tuesday, October 25th, 2022. Due to the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, in accordance with Chapter 22, the Acts of 2022, suspending certain provisions of the open meeting law, public bodies otherwise governed by the open meeting laws are temporarily relieved from the requirement that meetings be held in public places, open and physically accessible to the public, so long as measures are taken to ensure public access to the body's deliberations through adequate alternative means. This meeting will be live on Zoom. The public may participate remotely by joining Zoom, meeting ID number 854-0032-4335, or by calling 929-205-6099. For additional information about remote participation, please contact Carly Antonellis, Assistant Town Manager at ATM@Ayer.MA.US, or 978-772-8220, extension 100 prior to the meeting. All right, excellent. So first order of business for today we have is review and approval of the previous meeting minutes from September 13th, 2022. I had no issues.
No issues.
Me either. I'll make a motion to approve the minutes from September 13th, 2020.
Second.
We have a motion and second. Roll call the vote. Ms. Antonellis.
Aye.
Ms. Tierney.
Aye.
Mr. Pombrian.
Aye.
And chair says aye. All right, excellent. Minutes are approved. Item 3 on the agenda is town finances and budget status update.
Mr. Chair, I'll go first. In terms of the budget update, as we're beginning to enter into the season, as they say, the capital directive has gone out. All departments have until Friday, October 28th to return the revised and updated capital plans. I've been in communication with some of the departments regarding some of the potential larger items and so forth, but we will be in good shape to start the capital process after October 28th on that front. Also, the rate review committee did meet this month, specifically focused on the solid waste transfer station rates. They have another meeting for November 1st, at which time we're anticipating basically 2 recommendations. One will be a very small increase involving the stickers, and in preparation for that meeting and reviewing the DPW director and the committee, a lot of the bulk items and the schedule and price for the disposal of the bulk items is way out of date and not competitive. So the main focus on November 1st, there's some further work to be done by the DPW director and others to come together with again, a modest but realistic increase on some of these bulk items. If all goes as planned at November 1st, the committee at the meeting articulated they'd like to come to the select board with their recommendations for the November 15th meeting. So the rate review committee is underway, focus on solid waste. They will then be switching rapidly after the solid waste piece to the water and sewer rates. And one of the topics they'll also be discussing on November 1st is updating the rate model as it pertains to water and sewer. Specifically, the flows and the flow rates are significantly need to be updated, for lack of a better term. And there's been some talk about potentially a different consultant to work on that effort. So the rate process is underway. Lastly, as the budget calendar has been approved by the select board, per that, we'll be looking to issue the budget directive for the overall budget for December 1st. I anticipate to have a couple of initial discussions on the budget with the select board prior to that, to get some thoughts and input. And I also hope to meet with the Finance Committee to do the same. Since the buy board last met, the last meeting of the FinCom, frustratingly, I think everybody just unfortunately didn't have a quorum, so they're in the process of regrouping on that front. So that's the budget status update. And through you, Mr. Chair, I don't know on the financial end if Barbara, you have any updates on collections or anything from the financial side.
So as far as collections, we're gearing up. November 1st due payments are starting to flow in, so we're busy. I just completed the tax taking on the 21st, so we're doing all the follow-up paperwork and recording. That went well. And as far as like our fiscal 22 audit goes, I've been working with Pam, our auditor. I believe I have pretty much everything that she needs from me for that audit, and my reconciliations are up to date and current, so we're in good shape.
Great, and just through the chair, so Barbara, as far as collections and everything remains on target?
Yes,
Excellent.
yes, through the chair.
Thank you. Anything else on finances or budget? Okay. Item 4 on the agenda for today is review of financial policies, proposed revisions, updates, and next steps to completion.
So, Mr. Chair,
Mr.
through you,
Pomprian.
and I did send out to everybody, and I appreciate everybody's input. I did send out what we'll call sort of the final working draft, and one of the biggest challenges I found was in using the track changes with everybody's thing. It started to look like you know, an electric circuit board. So I did, perhaps oversimplify it with a color-coded system. And in a minute, I asked Carly to prepare the shared screen. What I sent is in yellow were any, highlighted in yellow are any changes from the existing, the current policies. And those changes were pretty much, for lack of a better word, there's pretty much sort of consensus. So we've discussed those. The light blue, which we'll get to, as I mentioned in the transmission, were some areas where we need to make some decisions. The third thing, Barbara reminded me just recently since then, and we can discuss it, maybe put this in the light blue category, is do we want to have a free cash policy, a free cash directive? The current policies define free cash and so forth, but do we want, and the light blue question, do we want for this version some type of policy on that? And the other one that has come up and will come up again in the budget cycle is the tax levy, and specific the overlay and excess levy capacity. Again, I think the current policies do a good job, Mr. Chairman, in defining those and what they are. The question is, you know, do we want to have any, you know, policy directive? So those were two things Barbara brought to my attention since I sent out that email. But why don't we, what I was going to suggest, Mr. Chair, is we go through briefly at least the light blue areas. I think my final piece, and I'll do this quickly, is obviously there's a reason why these are subject to review and update every 2 years. I think one is because things change, but also we could spend forever. It's never ending in the sense it's always something, as they say. I think at some point we need to decide for this version, you know, this has been a robust update. This is the version we're going to send to departments and so forth for their review and move forward with that. So Carly, if we would go to, I just, hang on one second. If we go to page, we'll start with page 4. So obviously we'll have to update the table of contents and the revision thing. So again, as I mentioned on the yellow front, as you can see, everything from changing Board of Selectmen to town manager, the maintenance of the financial policies, as we discussed, we changed that. It used to be that there was going to be a committee. The executive buy board seemed illogical. So we changed that to the executive buy board. and that the review of the financial policies are subject to review by the Finance Committee and with approval by the Select Board. So as we move forward for the next version and in the future, as it stands, the BI Board would take the lead on preparing the review, and the draft, of course, needs to be reviewed ultimately by the FinCom and approved by the Select Board. On the restrictions of the financial policies, that was another area for looking for cleanup. Sort of these policies will be in effect upon acceptance by a majority vote of the Select Board, as they're the chief policy body. Amendments to the financial policies must be reviewed by the Finance Committee with approval by majority vote by the Select Board. Again, we could also put amendments may need to originate with the BI Board. But again, sort of cleaning that up there. And we'll go through and then we'll come back. And again here, this had to do, this is on page 5 with the audit letter, the management letter. So the existing policies, if you recall, talk about again another a formation of a committee that would review and make recommendations and so forth. We sort of have discussed through this process, cleaning that up a little bit to be, again, the BI Board will review the management letter from the audit firm, which by the way is something I'll, Mr. Chair, propose for our next meeting as we have it. The management letter, the BI Board would review it. We could put together from the BI Board a summary, distribute that to the department heads, and then the Finance Committee will review the recommendations and findings with the town manager, relevant department heads, and town officials in a public forum, and implement changes if necessary or possible. So the takeaway, we get the letter every year. I would transmit it here to the BI Board. We would review it in detail, put together appropriate synopsis. Some years it's very lean, which is great. Sometimes there are some points of discussion and policy. We put together a summary and then, go to the Finance Committee. And I suppose also we could, the Select Board, if they wanted, those are public meetings, and then talk about next steps there. So the big change was defining sort of the BI Board and the process on that. At the bottom of page 5 onto page 6, this is our first sort of light blue area, is the financial forecasting component. And let me just say, my opinion from my perspective, when I first started here, a lot of work and effort was underway to develop the financial forecasting and the 5-year model. This is not a criticism of anyone. Since I first came here, this has, in my opinion, yet to fully materialize and get off the ground. Others may disagree. That's just my observation. I have, from my opinion is, I have no problem with leaving it. The question and why I put it in blue is, are we going to do it? And that's meant to be a rhetorical question to some extent. I think this is an area where we need to decide what do we want to do in terms of financial forecasting and in terms of the financial model. I believe as a town, there's some room for improvement here. I know that we do revenue projections every year. I know that we, build upon the previous. We do a lot of different work, but I think the intent of the policies from their inception, the intent was to have a formal financial forecasting and model moving forward.
Yeah, Robert, if I can just interrupt for a moment. The 5-year forecast, in my opinion, is vital to our ability to really look years out and do a longer term planning. So, I think when I first started on the Finance Committee, it was frustrating that everything was siloed 1 year at a time. Wasn't really much of a look ahead. So there are ways that we can build a 5-year forecast that is actually somewhat viable. The biggest variable in that would be capital, but if we can push to get capital little more realistic on the 5-year view,
Mhm.
we can marry those two together and hopefully put something together that actually is at least useful. I mean, the thing about forecasting is every year you go away from where you're at, it's less and less accurate, but at least it gives you a sense of where things are going.
I agree, and that's why just to clarify, the reason I put it in light blue was more of, I think we should leave it at this point. I think I flagged it in light blue that I think we, as the buy board and so forth, need to have a further discussion as to further formalizing and developing this. I agree with everything you said, Scott, and I think our challenge is just to get it to a point of further refined and more of a reality. But I don't think we should pull it. I also don't think that we should change it. I think what we need to do is develop a goal and a benchmark in the year ahead to get this going.
Yeah, I think we should keep it in.
Okay. All right, then I added if you move up just a little bit, Carly, and thank you, Carly. Here, I just added, this is sort of a new section that we have developed the town budget calendar, which I think, since it was brought up by Selectman Hood a few cycles ago, has been a good step in the direction and has been helpful to the town. We've received a lot of positive feedback. So this section here, I guess you could say, is new. It defines that each year, beginning in July, the buy board shall develop a proposed budget calendar for the upcoming fiscal year, subject to review. I should put probably subject to review and input by the finance committee and approval by the select board. The town budget calendar shall contain all major dates, deadlines, and events related to the town budget process. The select board shall finalize and approve the budget calendar no later than their first meeting in October. Once approved by the select board, any changes to the budget calendar must be presented to the select board for review and approval. The budget calendar shall be distributed to all town departments by the town manager and is available on the town's website or upon request from the select board office. So basically, this sort of codifies what the current practice has been. Again, this would be a new addition to the policy here. All right, Carly, we'll move on to, that was just clarification there. Keep going. Okay, so then here on this section, if you look at the previous version of the policies, talked about in general the looking at the rates and enterprise funds, and as we've been discussing, this here just clarifies, since the last version, really the role of the rate review committee. So the town's rate review committee will review the rates and fees of the solid waste enterprise, water enterprise, and sewer enterprise on an annual basis and make formal recommendations to the select board in a public forum. And that's in concert with statute. And then the town's ambulance enterprise fund will be reviewed annually by the fire chief, town accountant, finance manager, and town manager with any formal recommendations made to the select board in a public forum. So again, this is just sort of codifying the current practice and clarifying sort of those rate processes. Okay, as we go down, all right, there's a blue area here we've talked about is the cannabis tax, a local tax. So we have had a very successful, I think, policy with the use of the local meals tax in funding OPEB. We know that the cannabis money is going into the general fund. The question is, and I throw up question marks here too, is we've talked about this some, but we haven't really nailed down, do we want a policy with respect to the use of those funds? And I'll just add this, as everybody knows, but for everyone's benefit. This policy, if we come up with something, would most likely involve the appropriation authority of town meeting. So again, these are general fund monies, subject to appropriation by town meeting. But what are folks' thoughts on the cannabis tax?
I think it's worth putting something together. How much annually is it?
So the last couple quarters, it's kind of leveled out to be around the mid 80s. So we're not seeing quite as much the last few quarters as we were that first couple of years now that surrounding towns have, which is why I think it's really important to dedicate it versus having it incorporated into our regular budget.
So through
I
the
can
ch-
look that up though, if you like.
So through the chair, so Barbara, I know that there was, a spike in the beginning and then there was some
Yeah.
interruption with the pandemic. So you're saying that the last couple of payments you're looking at, it's, let's just say for the sake of discussion, about 80,000?
Yeah, it was around the mid 80s. I can look that up real quick while I'm here. But I think I remember bringing it, I thought it was to you, Robert, a while back, and I'm just that it was kind of leveling out. And but if you'll bear with me, if you want to keep talking, I'll look that up.
Sure. We can circle back on that.
Okay.
Actually, I have it. So the last quarter of 22 was 81,254. And then the first quarter of 23, we haven't received the second quarter yet, $74,080. So that's down from the first couple of quarters of 22. It was like 120, then it went to 107, 99, and 81, and then 74. Which I know we kind of talked about. It was probably not going to continue on the same path as other towns around us got their licenses. So we are seeing that.
Are other communities around us or that have cannabis dispensaries, are they using anything to specify where it goes that anyone's aware of?
I haven't seen. I think Ayers had it more. Do you know, Carly?
I've had discussions, I've been in a class the past couple of weeks, and in talking just with other town managers, it seems like no one wants to commit it to a certain spot because it's been kind of volatile, meaning up and down, up and down. So most people are just letting it go into their free cash, honestly.
And from my perspective, a couple places, because this is sort of still new territory, but I know some communities have looked to put it towards, and we're much more ahead of them, but put it towards, say, capital stabilization. There's been a few towns that have put this towards capital stabilization. A lot of them, it's still sort of general fund situation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thinking that if we at least define it in our policies for this time, and then as we get more time under our belt, if you're not ready to make a decision yet, but maybe at least put in a definition in here like we did for meals and sales tax, that it's in general fund money, etc.
I think that's I think that's a good point, Barbara. I mean, that's easy enough to do, at least to define what it is. And then the question is, hence the light blue, what do we want it to go towards?
Could you say something, like general fund revenue to be, further appropriated to either capital stabilization or, regular stabilization, OPEB?
So for the meals tax, we have, that goes towards OPEB, but it's not 100% funding the OPEB amount.
So what if we fully funded the OPEB and then said any additional went towards?
Yeah, that's
undesignated.
That's kind of my thought. If we want to fully fund the OPEB, the other item is, it's about 320,000 at 80,000 a quarter, 320 for the year. Probably, we could look to do, I think, like the OPEB, we're looking at a future liability that we can quantify to a degree, is to use that same premise. Like, let's put it towards whether it's OPEB or even the funding that we did for the retirement obligation something along those lines. I know we're probably not going to do the retirement one again, but I think the op-ed might be a good one.
Okay,
And just through you, Scott, last year, just for everybody's information, sales and meals tax was 154 for fiscal 22. The first quarter for fiscal 23 was 46. So we're still staying right in that ballpark.
All right, thank you.
okay.
Yeah, so maybe given where we're at, getting the finance committee up and running, to Barbara's point, let's define the cannabis tax, and then maybe put a placeholder in that we can have one follow-up discussion with this group that includes the finance committee, to get their feedback to codify what we want to do with it.
Scott, your audio is cutting in and out pretty good. I don't know if it's only me hearing that, but.
I'm hearing it too. I thought it was me.
All right, working from home today, that tends to be a challenge.
Body.
I heard you, Scott. I get the assignment. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna, as Barbara's been, we're gonna define what the cannabis tax is. That's easy enough to do, and I think that's important for the purpose of the policies. And then we'll have sort of a placeholder, this will be reflected in the minutes too, the various discussions that folks have come up with. And if you think of something, let me know as well.
Keep going, or?
Yep, so then if we moving along, yeah, keep going, that was, yep, underneath the cannabis tax. So there was the issue of TIFs and the special tax agreements. And as we discussed, the current policy has an old mechanism for this. So what we have been doing is, so when a tax increment financing TIF agreement, a special tax assessment agreement is presented to the town, we should say for consideration, the said TIF or STA shall be reviewed by a committee consisting of the town manager, assessing administrator, director of economic development, finance manager, and a member of the finance committee. The committee shall have the authority to negotiate the terms of the TIF or STA, subject to review and approval of the TIF or STA by the select board. Additionally, all TIF and STA agreements must be approved by town meeting. So this sort of reflects what the practice has been since 2018 on that. I don't know if there's any questions on that.
I don't have anything.
Okay. All right.
I don't
and
have
then
any questions.
Moving along. So then we are, so on employee compensation, and I think this was a great step from the last review. A couple of things I flagged on here. Well, the main one is I clarified, because it's been the practice in the second paragraph, that the COLA recommendation shall also apply to all elected officials receiving a stipend, as well as the call firefighters. That's been the practice even before 2018, but that wasn't in the policy the last time. The COLA recommendation is subject to review and approval by the select board for inclusion in the fiscal year omnibus budget to be reviewed and approved by town meeting. And one of the things that Scott had brought up in his initial comments, and that's what I flagged here in blue, is the COLA recommendation shall not exceed the amount of, and I put question marks. So the way the policy has been working when we use these indices below and so forth, in the last 12 years, with the exception of FY12, the COLA recommendation has been 2%. In FY12, it was 0% as we were moving into regionalization. It's been 2%. The issue is if I was a betting man using these indices below, as we're hearing, for example, Social Security index, for example, there's going to be a record, COLA adjustment of about 8% there. Our union policy has generally been 2%. What Scott is raising, and I've been trying to think about as well, is do we put some kind of parameter or metric or control on the COLA recommendation? And I think it's a fair point, because we try to be objective using, our goal is to be objective using these indices. And I did check before Kevin left. These are still the major ones that are used. The concern is, what if you go by all of that and you have a town manager, not necessarily, not me, but or come forth to the board and make a recommendation that the FY24 COLA should be 6%. You know, so what are folks' thoughts on that? I mean, because the other thing with the COLA, and Scott knows this, I think everybody on this call knows this because we've discussed this, is one of the other guiding principles has to be affordability and sustainability as well. And I mean, I will, from my vantage point position, up until now, and we have yet to do this process, the 2% has been fair and sustainable. The question is, and those of you who are involved, you know, we do battle almost every year with the unions that come in anywhere from 3% to 21%. Any thoughts what we should do on that?
Just a quick thought.
Oh,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Okay, Carly, you sure?
Go ahead, Barbara.
So what I liked what Robert just said about, instead of maybe putting a percentage, I liked that Robert used the words fair and sustainable, and I don't see those in the policy yet. So depending on what that is, it could vary, but I liked that terminology.
So Barbara, through the chair, so what you're saying is put in the policy of some language to the effect of, you know, fair and sustainable something. It's a good point.
Carly?
And I was just gonna say too, as far as, you know, I know 2% certainly has been consistent in my 8.5 years, both with union and non-union, and it is great and it is appreciated. But I think sometimes it ends up costing us more, because the union knows we're gonna really try to settle at 2%. And then they're looking for extras elsewhere, I'll call it. So I mean, some years I think it would be cheaper if we were to give a group a 2.5 or a 3%. And that would be it. But I just feel like there's such a focus on the 2% that sometimes we could do better, even maybe offering more, because then you don't have to offer as much elsewhere. It's just a thought.
Yeah, that's definitely a good point. My reason for putting the comment was really, when you tie everything together, when we look at union and non-union, is, you know, if we do our union contracts, we do the 2%, you know, the taxpayers understand, or most of them understand, you know, it's a 2% COLA. It's also step increases on the grid. There's also longevity. So that, you know, it does question the sustainability over the long run. And Carly, you do make a good point that yes, we do end up paying in other areas. My biggest concern is the situation we're in going to this last budget cycle is we have all of our union contracts at 2%. We use the COLA formula and it comes back, say, a 7% increase because inflation. And then all of a sudden we have to reopen all of those contracts and we have to give 7% across the board. And trying to claw that back down from a 7% is going to be incredibly difficult, because we're going to end up having to give exponentially more to get that clawed back down. So I think that the fair and sustainable is definitely good verbiage to put in. I would also propose that we put in something that says in consistency with the union contracts.
Okay.
And that way, you know, at least it's documented that we need to, you know, that they're intertwined, so to speak.
Okay. Both good points. Yeah, the issue, and if I had all of the answers, maybe I would write the book on it, and I talked to my colleagues on this. The issue of municipal compensation is an ongoing and unique challenge. But I do definitely the sustainability point, the fairness point, the consistency with the unions and the non-union folks. But feel free also to further reflect on this if there's further thoughts. I mean, I even toyed with, the COLA recommendation, as I put here, shall not exceed maximum, 3% or so forth, but then that creates conflict with the concept of using, the indexes and so forth. The other thing we have to keep in mind, and this is why they get the big bucks, ultimately though, too, the check on it is if we came forth with it and the select board, you would hope, and they know the board does this, look at it and be like, this is not, there's a check, it's not a given, as well as, town meeting. So why don't we all just give this a little bit further thought? I definitely will take another version of it with the consistency language and the sustainability language. Because I can tell you that, as far as if you looked at these if you look at these indices now, the first 4 are probably going to show something in excess of 2%. Then the municipal personnel COLA survey, because that's done by all of the communities, including us, will range my predictions between 1% and 3.5% as you get closer to Boston. Obviously, the collective bargaining agreements are all held at 2%. So again, let's give it some further thought.
Yeah, the one interesting thing about our community, I'm not sure if everyone's aware of this, we are actually considered Metro Boston because we have the commuter rail. So that's the way that we end up being grouped when it comes to all of our financial information within the census. So, when you look at being 30 some odd miles outside of the city, but, still being tied to the financial inflationary or consumer price index, doesn't make a lot of sense, but be more detrimental to the town in the long run.
No, excellent point, Scott. I agree, and it's a ongoing battle and anomaly as to how we're grouped in there. Okay, moving along, then we get into the funds. Keep going. This is pretty solid, obviously. Oh, so right here, would be sort of a new section. Would be the reserve fund and reserve fund transfers, and we've talked about this throughout this review. So the town's reserve fund is in accordance with the provisions of Mass General Law, Chapter 40, Section 6, and is to be used only for extraordinary or unforeseen expenditures. In order to access the reserve fund, a reserve fund transfer RFT form must be completed by the town department or elected official requesting the transfer. The form requires the amount being requested, the account name and account number of which the funds will be transferred, the present balance in the account's budget, a written description of what the RFT will be used for, and a written explanation as to why the expense is extraordinary or unforeseen. The RFT must be reviewed and approved by the Finance Committee in accordance with Chapter 40, Section 6, and the Select Board. I should probably put a disclaimer. There's a couple of scenarios where it's just the FinCom. The funding of the reserve fund shall be reviewed annually by the Finance Committee in consultation with the town manager and town accountant to determine an adequate level of funding for the reserve fund for inclusion in the fiscal year omnibus budget. So again, the current policy, we don't have an area this sort of just spells out the RFT and the RFT process. The other blue area, when we get to stabilization on these 2 pages, so stabilization, why I put this in blue, and this was flagged by a lot of you in your comments, and I know we've discussed this, is do we want to, change these percentages and these amounts. I mean, as we know, when the financial policies first came into being, we were still in a position where we were putting aside and building up stabilization and capital stabilization to meet the benchmarks. We exceed those benchmarks as of right now. So I don't know what folks' thoughts are on this, and what the practices you all know have been, the recommendation, at least the last few budget cycles. We've been putting the lion's share of free cash into capital stabilization based on that capital expenditures obviously are generally significant in size, and not putting as much, a much smaller amount in stabilization. I did clarify under C in yellow that the use of stabilization and capital requires the authorization of town meeting by a 2/3 vote, but what are folks' thoughts on the percentages? And not to put you on the spot, maybe you want to think about it and let me know, do we change any of this?
Well, our stabilization fund is over 7 right now, or oh, it's 10,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, let's see.
The minimum funding percentage was developed at a time where there was a little bit of a disagreement between the select board and the finance committee, where the finance committee was trying to look more towards the future. So as it's a hope that as we build our budget, we know we need to put an X percentage into stabilization for the future, and then build our budget around that, as opposed to just building a full operating budget and then saying, well, we don't have anything for stabilization. And I understand we're in a complete different area now than we were when the first version of these policies were put together. I would like to see that minimum percentage at least stay, because because we don't know how sustainable our current situation is. And on the percentage for capital, I do actually think that should be increased, but I don't know what it should be.
Okay. I think, oh, go ahead, Barbara. I'm sorry.
My thoughts were initially about changing the percentage, and then I came across some other policies where they, in addition to stabilization and capital stabilization, they have a percentage of free cash that they try to maintain, unused and undesignated. So I think I sent that to you, Robert. And I apologize, it was late in the game.
Yeah, no,
I
I'll
just
send
kinda-
that to everybody. Yeah.
So I thought if we're not sure about percentages, maybe if we focused on building that up for now instead, but take a look at it. And then the only other thing I wanted to say is for capital stabilization, I'm trying to see, but don't we have something in here that says if we know we have a large expense on the horizon, that we would continue to build it up in anticipation? And I think we've been doing that because of the potential of a new school.
Mhm.
So I think that's working. I'm trying to remember where I saw that, but those are my two thoughts.
I think it might be in the capital section.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So when I looked at it, I concur with Scott in the sense of keeping the minimum, the 7%. The question is, I also agree on the capital piece, not only based on past practice, but where we are now, potentially increasing that percentage. But in all honesty, I don't have a thought on an exact number yet. So again, as the policy stands, it's not a huge problem. The issue is, do we want to, upgrade it to reflect the current trend? And Scott makes an excellent point. As we all know, we're in a strong, position, and things are the way they are, but things happen, and let's hope not all the time, that can drastically shift it, some huge unforeseen capital thing or so forth. I will also send what I just got from Barbara, I'll send to everybody about this policy she found about an undesignated amount of free cash as it relates to this. But I don't know if you want to think about that a little bit more in that area. But we have not changed these, percentages or looked at this in some time. Okay, moving along.
Can we, sorry, Robert, can we
Yeah.
circle back real quick to the reserve fund transfer?
Yep, we'll go up a little bit. Yeah, right there. Yep.
So one of the things regarding the reserve fund transfer is I think on the process from how it was explained to me when I first started versus how we're actually using it, it seemed to be two different things. And I think we should try to codify that.
Okay.
So the way it was explained to me is that the reserve fund transfer is when a budget is fully utilized beyond, and there's additional expenses in there that were not in the budget, as opposed to, I think what we've been doing is, if fire department says, well, we have, or we'll use the police because the police are I think are one of our biggest give backs at the end of the fiscal year. The police will come for a reserve fund transfer of $20,000 because they have an invoice, say, for HVAC, but then at the end of the year, they're giving back, say, $50,000, $60,000 of unused budget. So I think it's just, I would like to, and I'm not sure exactly what DOR regulations are at this age, because as I'm getting older, I forget more things than I remember. What the actual process is supposed to be in regards to those, is it at the time of incurrence, or is it at the time of end of the year when the budget's used up? Because I know also in the past, sometimes departments would discuss with the finance committee to say, this is something we need. Would you approve a reserve fund transfer if we move forward? And I'm not sure if we're putting the cart before the horse in that front. And that kind of also goes back to, I think, the UDAG discussion around the usage of UDAG.
Excellent points. And I actually have to, on another matter, speak to our DOR rep. I actually have a call in. Let me ask her on the clarification. So, and I made a note here, and I now remember, I'm getting older too. I had no gray hair not that long ago. I remember you and I also discussing this too. There has been, and I don't think there's malintent on this, but I'll categorize it as there has been a drift from on the RFT from, say, 10 years ago till now. So why don't I check with DOR and come up and revise this with the proposed language. I know exactly what you're saying, and I think it's something we need to tighten up. Okay, good. All right, so the stabilization, if folks would think about that on the percentages and so forth. Then we come to OPEB. Again, policy is pretty solid on that already. The yellow area just mentions that there is a OPEB Board of Trustees, who the positions are that are on it, that it does meet quarterly to review, and that's in the charge. It's supposed to meet quarterly to review the OPEB trust, and that's an open meeting, and to make any formal recommendations to the select board, which is generally those recommendations are coming sometimes sooner than early in the budget process, but no later than about February or March, what the recommendation is. And it's been the last several cycles consistent with our policy on the meals tax and free cash at that 300 or 320,000%, $300 or $320,000. So I don't know if there's any questions there. Next, almost there. So I just put in blue, as the policy reads now, it says the town expects to contribute 300,000 annually into an OPEB trust. I'm not suggesting that we have to change that, but I just did put it in blue if there was any thoughts of changing that number. I think, Barbara can correct me if I'm wrong, I think that's remains the magic number, if you will.
Yes, it's been that amount since I've started here.
And that puts us on
Consistently.
target for the fully funding.
Yeah, so Parker Elmore from Odyssey did make this amount I think we came up with, or Lisa had come up with, because it gave us the full available discount rate when calculating our unfunded liability. So it gave us the top bang for our buck for minimizing our unfunded future liability while making a contribution. If that makes sense.
Yep.
When's our next actuary report due? For
So
that?
we're on that in between year. So we're in the it's every other year, and it was last year for OPEB. So it'll be next year.
Okay, because I'm actually, my only thought is maybe we contribute a minimum of 300,000 annually.
I'm
Because
sorry, one more time, Scott.
just adding the word minimum before 300,000.
Okay, yep,
Okay.
I think that's good. Minimum before 300. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, looking at, the question on the campus tax is if we want to try to if we get to a point where we want to start maximizing a little bit more,
Mhm.
depending, because I know we have a lot of retirements, over the last year and a half and into probably over the next couple of years too. So, we need to make sure we're in a good position for that.
I am going to request, Mr. Chair, that the select board put a townwide moratorium on any retirements until 2042.
All right, we'll do that in a pizza parlor.
Okay. All right, so we'll add minimum there. So then new section, which we've been talking about, the UDAG Urban Development Action Grant. And so I put this together based on all of your feedback and what we've discussed. It reads, the town's UDAG funds are under the direct authority of the select board. Though these funds are currently unrestricted, the select board shall only consider authorization of UDAG funds upon recommendation of the town manager and finance manager for use toward one-time economic development or infrastructure needs of the town, which are extraordinary or unforeseen outside of the normal budget processes. Additionally, the select board shall authorize the use of UDAG funds by a simple majority vote and subject to said funds being replenished with free cash by a future town meeting. So that's overall where we've been for the most part. Again, using the theme word of today, there has been a drift on occasion on some things. From what I heard, I mean, this defines what the UDAG is, defines what the mechanism is, and says it really should be only one-time economic development or infrastructure needs. And again, sort of stealing the RFT language, but of extraordinary, unforeseen, outside of the normal budget process, and maybe we put to include the capital process. And then there's the replenishment piece. I know that there's been some discussion too in the past, whether do we replenish it or do we, if it's used for one-time economic and infrastructure, and that's it. But that's a policy decision.
So I know we've used it for, we've used it for capital purchases in the past also. I don't know if I want to introduce that into the language. I mean, there are situations where, like for example, where we are now with supply chain issues, when the police chief needed a new car, and we, authorized the money so we could get into the queue for that. I mean, I like how it's worded, but I don't know if it might be, I don't know, I guess maybe get the feedback from, Fred and the finance committee on modifying it that way. I like the way that it is worded as is, though. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, and again, as we all know, this is still going to also go to the departments and the FinCom for review. The next section, in a nutshell, this is another new section as the town meeting created in 2019. This is the reserve fund for future payments of accrued liabilities for compensated balances. This is per chapter 40, section 13D. And it explains what it is, I'm in the interest of time, what it is, the mechanism, and at the bottom, the last piece, it's recommended that this reserve fund maintain a balance of at least $50,000. Contributions to this reserve fund will be considered during the annual budget process by written request from the town finance manager and subject to approval by town meeting. So again, the recommendation is that the minimum balance be of at least $50,000 per year. Again, this depends on how many, it's largely driven by either retirements or unforeseen separation, but this is basically right out of the warrant article. And okay, and then on capital planning, I just clarified the composition of the committee. There's one member of the select board who acts as chairperson, one member of the finance committee, the town manager, the town accountant, finance manager, and 5 or fewer in an odd number of citizens. So just clarifying the composition. No changes really on the mission statement. I think was very good. Nobody flagged anything. Keep going down, down. The charge, and then we get to just that capital request shall be submitted to the town manager using the appropriate forms provided by the town manager. I flagged here and put, do we need to increase, adjust this, or leave it? Right now, a capital expense is an asset with an initial individual cost or cumulative cost of more than $10,000 and an estimated useful life in excess of 2 years. Do we want to just keep that? Do we want to increase that threshold?
Just real quick, the $10,000, is that just following 30B procurement? Where you have to have the quotes if it's 10,000?
I don't think so, Barbara. I think
No?
it was
Oh,
just,
okay.
it was just established that this has been,
Oh,
at least since I've been here, that's been anything over this activates, you know, the capital.
got it.
I don't, from my vantage point, I don't have any issue with that. I just wanted to flag it. Do we need to increase or adjust this? If people want to think about that, and let me know. Departments, go ahead, Carly.
I just think with, like, I'm still baffled and in disbelief and denial. 10,000 just seems so low now. Like, again, 4 benches for Depot Square was $8,900. Like, I can't believe it. So
Yeah,
it's still driving me nuts. I don't know, maybe we up it a little bit just because prices are only going up, but certainly whatever the committee thinks.
Yeah, I think updating it to Carly's point, I mean, the prices of things have gone up so much in the last 10 years. Increasing it works. And also when we're doing our budgeting, we usually claw back any one-time expenses we put into a budget as the baseline for the next year. So as long as we're able to keep doing that, you know, the fear, I think, you know, 10, 12 years ago was that if you put 10,000 in for, you know, turnout equipment, you know, well, it's probably not a lawnmower, we'll say a lawnmower for the DPW, that 10,000 stays in the budget going forward. But I think we're proactive enough that we're managing the baseline budgets very well and able to interject additional cash where needed.
So what if folks?
I do need to run. I actually have another meeting.
Okay.
Because I just have another job.
No, that's fine. We'll just finish up briefly the review. There's no decisions.
Yeah, I'm okay with increasing it. I agree. Costs have gone up, but I just don't know what that number would be.
Okay.
Yeah, we can put some thought into that. I do need to run.
Yep.
Robert, are you able to? Well, actually, we lose quorum if I leave, though. That's the challenge.
Okay. I know you, and so why don't we do this? We've been meeting when, Carly? The second?
Tuesdays. So do you want to do November 8th? Well, let me make sure you don't have rate review or anything.
Yeah, I'm actually traveling for work that week.
Okay,
Oh, and it's the election, duh. How about the 15th at 2?
That should work for me.
Okay,
okay, so November 15th at 2, and
Okay.
and then why don't we know, I'll send out an email with some next steps and we should probably adjourn.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, I will take a motion to adjourn, please.
so moved.
Do I have a
Seconded.
second? All right, thank you. Roll call the vote. Ms. Antonellis,
Aye.
Ms. Tierney,
Aye.
Mr. Pompriand,
Aye.
and the chair says aye. We are adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.